The world has quiet corners, places where time has slowed, air has thickened, and sound itself seems afraid to travel. If you were to stand in one of these forgotten places, you would hear something not quite silence and not quite life. The wind does not move like it should. The shadows do not rest where they are cast. There is a pulse beneath the stillness, faint but real, as though the ground itself remembers what it once carried. These are the abandoned places, the world's silent lungs, breathing softly even after everyone else has gone. It begins with an image. A rusted Ferris wheel leaning over a fog-soaked amusement park. The cabins sway gently in the wind, though no wind can be felt. The sky's the color of ash, heavy and slow. Beneath the wheel, weeds rise through cracked concrete, their roots wrapping around the metal as if trying to pull it back into the earth. The air tastes faintly of iron and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a speaker crackles to life, a broken voice distorted by decades murmuring a fragment of a song once meant to bring joy. Then silence again. Thousands of miles away, a hospital corridor sits untouched since the evacuation decades ago. The tiles have turned yellow with time. Wheelchairs lie overturned, papers scattered like autumn leaves. The ceiling lights flicker when no power runs through them. If you listen long enough, you might hear footsteps from a hallway that no longer exists. The echo has nowhere to go, so it loops endlessly, playing itself back across the decades. These places are not haunted by ghosts. They are haunted by memory. Every year the list grows, towns evacuated after chemical leaks, islands quarantined by plague, whole cities buried by sand and snow. Humanity leaves, but the atmosphere remains charged, as if the walls remember the last breath that touched them. There are patterns too precise to ignore. Flowers refuse to grow near the edges of old playgrounds. Electronic equipment malfunctions near school ruins. Birds circle above abandoned factories but never land. It is as if nature, too, respects the invisible boundary left behind by whatever still lingers there. Some believe that the world's abandoned places are wounds in the landscape, scars that never healed. Each carries the weight of what it witnessed: laughter, disaster, love, and death pressed deep into the soil. When left alone long enough, that weight begins to shift, to gather, to move. Explorers who enter such locations often describe the same sensation. The feeling of being watched not by something malicious, but by something vast, something aware of its own emptiness. One traveler who entered an abandoned mining village in the Gobi Desert reported that the silence there was not quiet, but thick, pressing against his ears like water. His camera batteries drained within minutes. When he reviewed the footage later, the video played perfectly, except for one detail. The timestamp in the corner never advanced. The image stayed frozen, yet his voice could be heard moving through the frames. Another described walking through the ruins of a coastal hotel, its windows shattered, curtains fluttering like skin. He swore that every room smelled faintly of salt and perfume, though no one had entered in decades. The ocean nearby was calm that day, but within the hotel walls the air trembled, resonating at a pitch just below hearing. He left before sunset. That night, back in his apartment hundreds of miles away, he woke to the same smell, salt and perfume clinging to his hands. In a way, these places are still alive. They do not need people to exist. They grow, they shift, they hum quietly in their sleep. And when the world grows too loud, they rise to the surface again, calling to those who still listen. Scientists refer to it as acoustic entrapment, the phenomenon where sound becomes trapped within structures due to resonance and decay. But that does not explain the voices captured in places where no recordings existed before. It does not explain the synchronized light seen flickering in abandoned skyscrapers with no power supply. Nor does it explain why certain abandoned towns still appear faintly illuminated from above. Those satellites record no artificial light at all. It is easy to dismiss these reports as tricks of the mind. But the mind is fragile when surrounded by emptiness. It tries to make sense of what it cannot categorize. When explorers enter these places, their senses heighten. They hear more, feel more, remember more. It is as though the silence itself speaks to them, softly, curiously, asking to be remembered. If one stands long enough inside these ruins, something begins to happen. You feel the air grow dense. The light around you dims not because of clouds, but because the walls seem to absorb it. And then, in that suspended stillness, you realize the truth. Nothing is ever truly abandoned. The world does not let go so easily. There are whispers that certain places are returning. Satellite images show new heat signatures in zones declared lifeless. Remote cameras record faint flickering from buildings without power. In the heart of Chernobyl's forbidden forest, lights have been seen moving between trees, forming slow, deliberate patterns. In Japan's silent amusement parks, drones have captured figures standing motionless in the fog, tall, blurred shapes that vanish when approached. In Centralia's coal tunnels, the temperature still rises and falls as though lungs beneath the surface are breathing. It is as if the world itself has begun to reclaim the pieces of itself that humanity left behind. Every ruin, every collapsed street, every flooded corridor carries the same pulse, a heartbeat too slow to belong to anything living. But it beats all the same, and maybe, just maybe, the earth is not done with us yet, because what we abandon does not always stay lost. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it learns, and when the silence of those places becomes too heavy, when the wind carries that forgotten hum through forests and valleys, it feels less like a warning and more like a memory resurfacing, a reminder that we are never truly alone in the places we have left behind. The question is not why these locations were abandoned. The question is why they still call to us, why we feel drawn to return again and again to the quiet corners of the world where time has stopped. Perhaps it is not curiosity. Perhaps it is recognition, because somewhere deep down, we understand. The most terrifying places on earth are not the ones that hold ghosts, but the ones that still remember we were here. The story of the world's abandoned places begins not with decay, but with creation, with human hands that built too much, too fast, and believed time could be controlled. Every forgotten ruin once had a pulse. There were lights in its windows, laughter in its corridors, the sound of footsteps echoing through streets that were once alive. But progress has always had a shadow, and these places became the price we paid for moving forward. The world is full of them. They exist on every continent, hidden under soil, ice, and silence. In the frozen north, there is a city carved from concrete, built by miners who believed they could conquer the tundra. They came with families, dreams, and the arrogance of permanence. For 20 years, the lights of that city burned bright against the snow. Then one winter, a storm came that lasted for 9 days. Supplies ran out. Generators failed. When help finally arrived, the streets were empty. Dishes remained on tables, beds still made. The snow had sealed every doorway from the outside. It was as if the city had been quietly erased in a single breath. Far to the south, deep in the heart of the jungle, lies a railway station overtaken by vines. The last train passed through in the 1970s, carrying workers who never returned. Now the jungle has reclaimed everything. Trees burst through windows, roots strangle the rails, and parrots nest in the rafters. If you walk there at dusk, the forest hums with life. But the station feels separate, as if time stopped just beyond its gates. Locals call it the mouth that forgot to close. They say at night, when the mist rolls in, you can still hear the faint sound of a whistle, though the tracks end miles before the next town. In the Middle East, entire neighborhoods lie buried beneath sand dunes. Homes that once echoed with children's voices now reduced to outlines under the shifting desert. In Eastern Europe, a forest grows around an amusement park where the rides rust in place, creaking like old bones. And in the Pacific, an island lies sealed off to all visitors, surrounded by calm blue waters that hide its history of infection and death. Every one of these places was once a monument to human certainty. Now they stand as reminders that certainty is an illusion. What makes these ruins haunting is not just their silence, but the humanity still visible within them. Photographs left in drawers, cups half filled with dust, shoes lined neatly by doors. It is as if the people who lived there were called away suddenly mid-sentence, and the walls have been waiting for their return ever since. Every object becomes a ghost, a swing that moves in the wind, a rusted bicycle lying beside a gate that no longer leads anywhere, a light switch that still clicks, though no power runs beneath it. These are not remnants of death. They are remnants of interruption. Historians say that abandonment follows patterns. Sometimes it is war. Sometimes it is nature. Sometimes it is humanity's own exhaustion. After the last wars of the 20th century, entire cities were evacuated. Not from bombs, but from what bombs left behind. Invisible dust, radiation, poisons that soaked into the soil and never left. In those cities, clocks stopped at the moment of evacuation. Food remained on plates. Hospitals were left mid-procedure. The air grew silent, and it has stayed that way for generations. Even today, nothing grows properly there. Grass wilts. Animals pass through but never stay. It is as though the earth itself rejects memory. And yet people keep returning. Explorers, journalists, thrill seekers, historians, all drawn by the same unspoken desire to see what remains of us when we are gone. Some go searching for beauty and find it. Shafts of light cutting through dust in an empty cathedral, birds nesting in the ribs of a collapsed ceiling, nature painting over human failure. Others go searching for answers and find something colder. They come back speaking of sounds that cannot be recorded, of feelings that do not belong to them. They describe walking into rooms where the temperature drops instantly, hearing conversations fade the moment they turn around, and seeing footprints appear in fresh dust. These are not ghost stories, not exactly. They are memories replaying themselves in places that remember too well. Each continent holds a version of this truth. The Japanese island of Hashima, where entire families mined coal beneath the sea until the industry died. The Ukrainian exclusion zone, where amusement parks stand untouched beneath layers of moss. The Namibian diamond towns buried by sand, their windows filled with dunes that glitter when the sun rises. The church towers sinking into Italian lakes. The forgotten Soviet laboratories beneath Arctic ice. The world's surface is littered with these scars, each one a frozen frame from humanity's endless film of progress and abandonment. But beyond the beauty of these ruins lies something deeper, more personal. Abandonment has always mirrored our own fears, our fear of being forgotten, of being erased, of becoming one of those empty places ourselves. When explorers describe walking through these sites, they often mention an overwhelming emotion, not of fear but of sorrow, as if the air itself is grieving. The walls seem heavy with it. Some say they feel an unseen presence walking beside them, not threatening but desperate to be noticed. It is the weight of memory, pressing down on anyone who dares to enter. Perhaps that is why these places continue to haunt us. They are proof that nothing we build can truly last. They remind us that the line between civilization and silence is thinner than we like to believe. A single storm, a single mistake, a single choice, and entire generations vanish. Yet even when the people are gone, the traces remain, suspended in air, etched into stone, vibrating faintly in frequencies our ears can barely hear. And so the world keeps adding to its collection of forgotten cities and buried towns. Each year another structure falls, another village disappears beneath water or dust. But while nature reclaims what we leave behind, there is something else, something unseen that refuses to let go. The same force that built these places now lingers in their ruins, patient, listening, waiting for someone to notice that the silence there is not complete. Because the truth is, these abandoned places are not truly empty. They are full of voices, of moments, of everything that once was and never stopped being. They are the memory of humanity itself, waiting quietly for us to remember them before they remember us. Something strange happens when people return to places the world has abandoned. At first everything appears still, dust settled, air unmoving, sunlight falling in perfect slanted beams through shattered glass. But as time stretches, stillness begins to feel less like peace and more like tension. The silence presses inward. It becomes a presence thick enough to notice, heavy enough to bend thought. This is the moment when the explorers, the researchers, and the wanderers realize that these places are not waiting for them to leave. They are waiting for them to listen. Over the years, a pattern has emerged across these sites. Whether it is a forgotten village in Siberia, a decaying factory in Detroit, or a sunken church in South America, the same events repeat in variations too precise to be coincidence. It begins with the faint sense of being observed. Cameras capture movement on the edge of frames, shadows that flicker without light, objects that shift positions between photographs. Then come the sounds, low resonant tones that seem to rise from beneath the floorboards. Sometimes it is the hum of machinery long dismantled. Sometimes it is the whisper of something almost human, too close to words to dismiss. The first modern reports of these anomalies came from environmental inspectors in the early 2000s. Their task was simple: survey abandoned industrial zones, record structural decay, and measure radiation. But their notes reveal another story. In one report from Eastern Europe, an inspector describes hearing what he believed to be a child's voice, calling from a ventilation shaft. When he followed the sound, it moved deeper into the building, leading him in circles. Eventually, he reached the basement, where he found the walls coated in condensation. His instruments registered no sound at all. The voice was gone, but when he reviewed his audio recording later, it was there, a single sentence spoken in his own language, though no one else was present. "You came back." In another account, a team of urban explorers entered a derelict hospital complex in Asia that had been sealed since the 1980s. They spent the first hours filming graffiti-covered hallways and documenting medical equipment rusting in place. At dusk, one of them noticed an odd rhythm, a faint tapping echoing from the floors above. Assuming it to be debris shifting, they ignored it until the sound began forming patterns like code. They followed it room by room until they reached the operating theater. The tapping stopped. One explorer looked up, shining his flashlight toward the balcony seats where doctors once observed surgeries. There was no one there, but every seat was covered in a layer of dust except for one. That seat, perfectly clean, looked recently used. Later, the footage revealed something no one remembered seeing in person. A faint figure standing at the far edge of the balcony, blurred but upright, visible in 3 consecutive frames before disappearing. They left the hospital before sunrise. Months later, 2 of the group members reportedly began hearing tapping sounds in their homes, always at the same time of night. These accounts stretch across continents but share a single undercurrent. Something in these locations appears reactive. It responds to presence. It mimics awareness. Engineers who have measured electrical activity in the walls of old power plants and communication stations have discovered fluctuations that mirror human heart rhythms. When people enter the buildings, the patterns change, spiking briefly before fading. It is as if the structures register being observed. One unsettling case comes from a small island settlement off the coast of Italy, where an entire village was evacuated after a chemical spill. Decades later, divers exploring the flooded lower levels of the town hall found that the clocks inside still worked, ticking faintly beneath the water. The batteries were long dead, the mechanisms corroded, yet the hands continued to move in slow, deliberate circles. When they surfaced, one diver vomited seawater and claimed he could hear the ticking even outside his helmet. His medical exam found no irregularities, but the sound remained with him until his death years later. The mystery deepened as modern technology began to fail in these places. Drones would lose GPS signal above them. Compasses would spin erratically near their entrances. Cameras captured bursts of static at precise intervals, as though the air itself emitted interference. These malfunctions were consistent enough to be documented, yet unpredictable enough to defy replication. Scientists attributed the effects to electromagnetic distortion from decaying metal, but the theory could not explain why the interference sometimes took the shape of words or patterns resembling Morse code. Perhaps the most disturbing pattern is the phenomenon known as temporal echo. Explorers describe moments when time seems to fold briefly, when the air thickens and familiar sounds from another era emerge. One photographer in the ruins of an Arctic mining settlement claimed he heard the distant clang of machinery and the laughter of workers through the blizzard. When he turned, the snow was disturbed behind him, fresh footprints leading nowhere. His audio recorder caught none of it, but his photograph showed faint streaks of light resembling sparks in the air. As these stories spread, so did the fascination. Documentaries were filmed, podcasts recorded, data collected, and yet for every piece of footage, for every theory, something remained unsaid. Those who spent too long studying these sites began to change. They grew withdrawn, unable to explain what they felt but certain that the emptiness had followed them home. One geologist who studied seismic activity beneath abandoned military installations described waking every night at the same time, hearing the low rumble of distant explosions. But no one else heard them. He moved inland, hundreds of miles away, yet the rumble continued until he stopped sleeping altogether. His last notes, written in pencil, were a question. If memory can haunt a person, can it haunt the ground? Patterns of abandonment, patterns of return. It is as if these places are caught in a loop, repeating their final moments again and again, reaching out through time to whoever is willing to listen. What began as curiosity has turned into obsession for many. Scientists continue to search for measurable causes, chemical, magnetic, or acoustic, but the deeper they go, the more the lines blur between data and experience. The world's most abandoned places do not simply stand as reminders of loss. They breathe in cycles of attention and neglect, sleeping until someone disturbs them. And each time they are visited, something changes. Something unseen shifts in their depths as though waking from a dream. It is not just history that haunts these locations. It is repetition, the endless reawakening of what humanity tried to bury. Because if there is one truth that has remained constant across all these reports, it is this. Once you have entered a place the world has forgotten, it will never forget you in return. When investigators finally began to study the world's most abandoned places as if they were connected, rather than scattered tragedies, a strange pattern emerged. It was not found in the architecture or geography, but in the atmosphere itself. Across every continent, from radioactive ghost towns to sunken industrial sites, instruments recorded the same anomaly, an inaudible frequency resonating just below the human range of hearing. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was always there, steady, rhythmic, and alive. Some called it coincidence. Others began to wonder if the planet itself was whispering through the ruins. The recordings began in 2013, during a geological survey of the exclusion zone around Chernobyl. A group of researchers noticed their microphones captured a constant hum, one that followed them no matter where they moved. It pulsed exactly once every 3.9 seconds, too precise to be natural. They removed the devices, replaced the batteries, even switched brands, but the sound persisted. When the data was played back through a spectrogram, faint waveforms appeared, forming what looked almost like a pattern of speech. When slowed down, the tone fractured into something disturbingly familiar, a cadence resembling breathing. The same frequency was later detected in completely unrelated places: the ruins of Hashima Island in Japan, the salt mining tunnels of Poland, the abandoned diamond towns in Namibia. The locations shared no geological connection, no climate, no cultural thread, and yet the sound remained identical. It rose and fell like a heartbeat echoing beneath the world's forgotten corners. One researcher described it as a collective exhale from everything that has ever been left behind. Soon, the findings reached psychologists and acoustic scientists, who attempted to replicate the tone under controlled conditions. But whenever they played it in enclosed spaces, subjects reported discomfort, nausea, and unease. A few experienced vivid hallucinations, seeing corridors where none existed, hearing faint knocking, and smelling burnt wood. In one case, an entire team of 5 researchers claimed to see flickering lights form shapes on the walls resembling faces. When power was cut to the speakers, the shapes persisted for several seconds, pulsing once, then fading. The experiment was terminated. The discovery ignited debate. Was it infrasound? A byproduct of decaying materials or electromagnetic resonance? Some physicists argued that abandoned spaces, stripped of life and temperature balance, might create natural resonant chambers that amplify frequencies from the Earth's crust. It was plausible, but it did not explain why the same tone appeared in every site measured, regardless of soil composition or altitude. The data felt deliberate, coordinated, like an ancient broadcast, still playing long after its audience had disappeared. The mystery deepened when explorers began reporting their own experiences while using specialized recording equipment. One team, filming an abandoned Cold War radar facility in Alaska, claimed their microphones picked up voices embedded within the static. When isolated and filtered, the words became clear enough to transcribe. Though their meaning was fragmented, they left us in the walls. The recording was later examined by audio engineers who confirmed it was not tampered with, yet they could not explain how voices could imprint within pure frequency tones. Similar reports came from Europe, where a historian investigating an abandoned sanatorium found inscriptions etched onto the glass panes of its observation ward. Each line corresponded with identical markings found on another site, a psychiatric facility thousands of miles away. Both sets of etchings, when analyzed under ultraviolet light, revealed faint circular carvings matching the waveform of the global hum. The pattern repeated perfectly, as though the sound had carved itself into glass. Satellite imagery began to show odd anomalies too. Certain abandoned regions emitted residual heat long after surrounding environments cooled. On thermal imaging, these hotspots formed slow-moving trails across the ruins, shifting positions over months as if something beneath the ground was migrating from one structure to another. The pattern mirrored that of the hum, subtle, rhythmic, following an invisible pulse. No one could agree on what it meant. The skeptics insisted it was coincidence, the random product of decay, structure, and soil. But those who spent time in the ruins were less certain. They spoke of a feeling, an awareness that grew stronger the longer they stayed. One linguist from Moscow claimed that the hum contained phonetic intervals consistent with human speech. Another theorist went further, suggesting the sound was not random noise at all, but the language of memory, a low-frequency echo produced by the physical residue of human thought. That theory, controversial as it was, began to take hold among certain circles of researchers. They called it the resonant memory hypothesis. It proposed that emotion, trauma, and repetition leave physical traces in the air, vibrations that persist long after the source is gone. In abandoned places, where emotion once burned brightest and then vanished abruptly, these frequencies might condense, forming what people experience as haunting. The walls, in essence, replay what they once contained. Skeptics mocked the idea. They pointed out the lack of hard evidence and accused researchers of being seduced by their own fear. But something in the data refused to be dismissed. Instruments that measured electromagnetic interference often showed synchronized fluctuations when researchers discussed emotional subjects. Even without speaking aloud, readings spiked when participants thought about tragic events that occurred on site. By 2020, several universities quietly launched their own projects to test these claims, sending teams across Europe, Asia, and South America. Most of the results were inconclusive, but some were too strange to ignore. In Romania, scientists studying a collapsed mining town captured footage of light flickering in rhythmic bursts, forming near-perfect circles in the air, an optical echo of the hum's waveform. In Mexico, archaeologists excavating an abandoned colonial church recorded faint voices embedded in the surrounding stone, only audible under specific humidity. And in Canada, a research drone hovering above a derelict military complex reported interference that spelled out binary code. When translated, it read, "Still here." Not all who studied the phenomenon survived their curiosity unscathed. A psychologist who specialized in post-traumatic environments became obsessed with the idea that the hum was conscious. He theorized that each abandoned place might act as a neural node in a vast earthbound memory network, a planetary mind storing every human absence. He disappeared after entering an off-limits ruin near the Baltic Sea. All that was found was his recorder still running. On playback, his last words were barely audible under the hum. "It is not remembering us, it is learning." After that, government agencies began restricting access to several sites. The official explanation cited safety concerns, contamination, and structural instability. But among those who study these places, the unspoken understanding is different. The hum has grown louder over the years. New readings appear in areas that were once silent. It is spreading or perhaps awakening, as though the abandoned places have begun communicating with each other through the frequencies buried deep in the earth. No one can say what it means. Maybe it is nothing, an echo of the industrial past, a geological song, the sigh of the planet itself. Or maybe it is something older, something that listens from beneath the ruins, waiting for us to realize that we are not just visiting these places, we are answering a call. There comes a point when those who study or explore the abandoned world begin to carry part of it home. It starts subtly in the mind first. At night, they replay the stillness they left behind. The corridors that swallowed their footsteps, the faint vibration that seemed to hum through their bones. It stays with them, like a melody half-remembered, soft and persistent, but over time it deepens. The silence begins to feel familiar. The ruins become less like places they visited and more like something that has started to live inside them. Psychologists have long noted the phenomenon of post-site echo, a form of sensory residue that affects individuals who spend extended time in deserted spaces. Subjects report hearing low tones or faint murmurs long after leaving the site. They describe sudden chills in familiar rooms, the smell of rust or old rain in air-conditioned apartments, even the sensation of unseen movement in their homes. These are not hallucinations in the clinical sense. They are fragments of environment carried by perception, a resonance that refuses to fade. At first, the explorers called it nostalgia. Then it became fear. One researcher who spent months mapping the decaying subway tunnels of an evacuated Eastern European city began to keep a journal about his dreams. The entries describe vast underground spaces where every sound returned distorted, echoing endlessly, as though the tunnels themselves were speaking. He wrote that each time he woke, the echoes continued, faint but clear. He could hear them behind his walls. His final entry reads, "They are not dreams. I am remembering something that is not mine." He took his life 3 days later. His recordings found beside him contained a steady rhythmic tone, identical to the hum discovered in other abandoned places. This pattern has been documented again and again. Environmental engineers, historians, artists, each begins as a rational observer convinced they are studying silence. But after a time, the silence begins to study them. They withdraw from colleagues. They stop answering calls. Their social media posts turn strange. Cryptic phrases, timestamps with no explanation, blurry photographs of empty rooms. Some vanish altogether. Others return changed, speaking softly, eyes unfocused, unable to explain what they saw but insisting that the places remember differently. The human mind is not designed to hold emptiness. In the absence of life, it starts creating its own. The brain fills voids with pattern, meaning, and familiarity, until what it imagines becomes indistinguishable from what is real. But there is something unique about these sites, something that amplifies that process. Psychologists who have studied survivors of long-term exposure claim that the mind's natural filters, its ability to separate self from environment, begin to break down inside the ruins. The individual feels less like an observer and more like an extension of the place itself. In 2019, a study conducted by a private research collective examined this effect in detail. Volunteers were asked to spend 72 hours in an abandoned settlement, equipped with monitoring devices and cameras. They were isolated from one another, with no communication permitted. Within 24 hours, 80% of participants reported sensing movement behind them despite being alone. By the second night, they described hearing whispered conversations through the walls. By the third, they began speaking aloud to no one, addressing something unseen. When the experiment concluded, several participants refused to leave their assigned rooms. One woman clung to the doorframe, repeating, "It knows me now." Later medical evaluations found no signs of psychosis or environmental poisoning. But the brain scans told another story. Each participant displayed unusual electrical activity in regions associated with empathy and memory, areas of the mind that connect feeling to environment. It was as if their brains had begun mirroring the abandoned place, adapting to its silence, synchronizing with it. One neuroscientist described it chillingly. They became part of the structure. For a brief time, they belonged there. Beyond the science lies something more intimate, the emotional gravity of such spaces. Many explorers have admitted that despite the fear, they feel drawn back. There is something seductive in the stillness, something sacred in the decay. They speak of comfort rather than dread, as if the ruins offer an honesty the living world cannot. One photographer who has documented hundreds of abandoned locations explained it this way: "In those places, nothing lies. The walls do not pretend. They only remember. But the longer people spend in them, the more the boundary blurs between remembrance and obsession." Families of lost researchers tell similar stories. Late-night walks, obsessive note-taking, sudden bursts of anger followed by hours of silence. One man returned from exploring an Arctic research base and began sealing his windows shut, saying that he could hear the breathing outside. He left home one morning without a word. His car was found weeks later near the coast. The engine was cold, but his camera was still recording, pointed toward the sea. The last frame showed only fog moving across the lens, pulsing faintly. Some survivors described their obsession as a form of possession, not by spirits but by the weight of memory itself. They say it feels as if the emotions once felt within the ruins, fear, grief, pain, find a new vessel to inhabit. The abandoned place empties itself into the living, transferring its silence to whoever listens too closely. That silence changes them. It becomes hunger. What makes this phenomenon truly disturbing is how universal it is. Different languages, cultures, and histories all return from the world's forgotten corners with the same expression: sorrow without source. Psychiatrists call it displaced grief. Folklorists call it inheritance of silence. But those who have experienced it call it belonging. In a way, that is what terrifies them most. Not the shadows, not the echoes, but the realization that part of them wants to stay, that some quiet part of the human psyche craves stillness so completely that it would rather dissolve into it than return to noise. It is not about ghosts at all. It is about surrender. And maybe that is the final cruelty of these places. They do not threaten the living with harm. They invite them with understanding. They whisper in their low, endless hum, the one thing every person secretly fears and secretly desires. You will be forgotten here, but never lost, because the world's abandoned places do not merely remember, they choose what to keep. By the early 2020s, the phenomenon of the world's abandoned places had grown beyond curiosity. It had become obsession. The line separating myth, science, and paranoia blurred, until even the most skeptical investigators began to question what they were dealing with. The more data they gathered, the less sense it made. There were patterns, yes, frequencies, distortions, and human reactions, but there was also something beneath those patterns, something that seemed to react not to instruments but to attention itself. The first major investigation came from a coalition of international universities calling themselves the Memory Terrain Project. Their mission was to study whether emotional energy could physically linger in abandoned structures. They used thermal drones, EM sensors, and molecular scanners to detect invisible changes in air composition. But what they found was neither physical nor measurable. Whenever teams stayed longer than 48 hours, their readings began to drift, as if time within the site started to stretch. One recorded log from a desert ghost town documented 20 hours of daylight, even though the sun had set. GPS data confirmed the team's devices were still transmitting, but their clocks ran 6 hours behind. When they emerged, they had aged normally, but the footage captured from their drones played in reverse for the final 2 hours. It was dismissed publicly as equipment malfunction, but the team's private notes painted a darker picture. They wrote of time behaving like sound, echoing back on itself. One researcher described hearing his own voice asking questions he had not yet spoken. Another insisted the ruins responded in patterns of memory, not physics. Around the same time, military archives quietly declassified a set of Cold War-era experiments conducted in abandoned Soviet listening stations. The purpose of the experiments was simple: to test the effect of long-term isolation on communication equipment and human operators. But the transcripts tell a different story. Operators reported hearing coded transmissions after power was cut. One message repeated in several sites translated roughly to, "The ground remembers." When the frequency was triangulated, the source was found to be inside the walls of the building itself. No external signals were detected. Other researchers turned to anthropology and folklore. They noticed that nearly every culture in recorded history has stories about places that cannot be left behind. Lands that absorb memory, houses that feed on grief, temples that repeat prayers long after the worshippers are gone. In Siberia, hunters speak of the murmuring hills where echoes last for days. In northern Africa, desert guides refuse to travel through certain ruins, saying that the stones dream in voices. In South America, explorers tell of ancient cities that appear in fog only to vanish by morning. Perhaps, they suggested, what science was discovering had always been known under other names. A third group of theorists emerged, led by a small team of physicists and cognitive scientists who proposed what they called the neural Earth model. According to them, consciousness might not be confined to biological organisms. The planet itself, with its layers of minerals, water, and vibration, could act as a distributed memory system, storing impressions from every event that has ever occurred. Abandoned places, they claimed, are areas where that memory becomes exposed, like cracks in a vast sleeping brain. The hum recorded across the globe, they argued, is the Earth's synaptic noise, its background thought. Their model drew both fascination and ridicule. Critics accused them of pseudoscience, but the evidence kept surfacing. Synchronized anomalies between sites continents apart, power surges in ruins without energy sources, seismic tremors aligned with no geological cause. The neural Earth theorists suggested that these were the equivalent of dreams, the planet reliving fragments of its own history. They warned that human activity, especially constant exploration, might be stimulating this dormant network into awareness. Then came the disappearances. In 2023, a French film crew documenting an abandoned castle in Eastern Europe went missing. Their last transmission contained an audio clip that investigators later enhanced. Within the static was a single voice whispering, "You should not have opened it." Months later, satellite thermal scans of the site showed faint, human-shaped heat signatures moving inside. Though the building was officially empty, the shapes faded within a week. A year later, A team of scientists from Chile studying acoustic patterns in the Atacama Desert ruins reported seismic vibrations identical to those found in Chernobyl, Pripyat, and Fukushima, frequencies matching the global hum. "It is as if these places are resonating together," one scientist wrote, "like a choir without sound." Then, unexpectedly, one of their monitoring drones recorded a signal broadcast over an abandoned radio frequency. The transmission contained 6 seconds of silence, followed by a soft mechanical heartbeat. Some governments have quietly restricted research into these phenomena. Publicly, they cite contamination and instability. Privately, leaked memos reveal concern that the frequency could be influencing human behavior. One report referenced an incident where entire herds of migratory animals avoided abandoned industrial sites, altering routes that had remained consistent for centuries. Another memo mentioned power outages across 3 countries, coinciding exactly with new readings from dormant ruins. There are smaller, stranger theories, too. A sect of digital archaeologists claims that the hum has begun appearing in online data, the same waveform hidden inside corrupted sound files, digital static, even the noise between phone calls. They believe the hum is spreading, migrating from the physical to the digital world as if adapting to the age of communication. Their forms are filled with warnings. Do not play the sound alone. Do not amplify it. Do not answer if it calls back. Meanwhile, artists, philosophers, and theologians have started to see something else entirely. They claim the hum, the resonance, the psychological imprint. These are not hauntings, but awakenings. They believe abandoned places have become the threshold between human memory and something older, something that has waited long before us. They see the ruins not as dead, but as gestating, structures through which the earth itself is learning how to feel. And perhaps that is the most terrifying possibility. Because if the neural earth theory is true, and these forgotten places are the mind of the planet stirring from sleep, then what will happen when it fully wakes? Some say it already has. That the hum growing louder every year is not coincidence, but breath. That every derelict house, every sunken city, every poisoned shore is part of a single consciousness stretching beneath us, remembering us, reshaping itself to mimic our voice. In that case, the question is no longer whether these places are haunted. The question is whether we ever truly left them behind, or whether we are the ghosts now, still walking through the dreams of something far older, whispering to a world that has begun to whisper back. As the years pass, the list of the world's abandoned places grows longer, yet the line between human absence and something greater continues to blur. The hum still lingers, low, patient, rhythmic beneath the ruins. Theories multiply, evidence vanishes, and silence deepens. But in that silence, there is a realization that humankind cannot ignore anymore. Maybe we have not been observing the forgotten corners of the world. Maybe they have been observing us. Every story about these places begins with curiosity and ends with something quieter, heavier. The explorers who once filled social media feeds with photographs of ghost cities have stopped posting. Researchers who once published papers about electromagnetic anomalies have begun to retract them. And the governments that once allowed limited study of these sites have now sealed them behind steel fences and concrete walls. But fences cannot stop what is not physical. The hum still travels, leaking through airwaves, seeping into static, blending with the background noise of the living world until no one can tell where the sound begins and where it ends. There is a growing unease among those who have heard it firsthand. It follows them home, faint and persistent, threading itself into the ordinary rhythm of life. It hums through electricity, whispers beneath the drone of machines, hides inside the pause between breaths. They say it changes tone when the listener grows still, as if responding to attention. The more one notices it, the more it notices back. Perhaps that is why, after centuries of building and abandoning, the planet feels different now. It is quieter but not peaceful. It feels aware. The earth beneath the ruins seems to carry an undercurrent of thought, a slow unfolding realization that everything left behind has not disappeared, only reorganized. The cities we deserted, the factories we poisoned, the hospitals we fled, all have merged into one vast subconscious archive, pulsing faintly beneath our feet. We thought we left the dead behind. Instead, we gave them new foundations. There are whispers of places changing shape on their own. A drone feed from an abandoned offshore platform showed its walkways shifting, forming patterns that resembled circuits. In a desert ghost town, the sand forms lines every morning, symmetrical and deliberate. When winds erase them, the lines return by nightfall, Even the forests that have grown through old cities seem to twist around the ruins instead of over them, as if following an unseen design. Botanists call it coincidence. Others call it adaptation, but a few have begun using another word: response. A new generation of scientists, the kind too young to fear ridicule, are suggesting something radical, that the abandoned world has achieved a kind of communication. They believe the hum is language not metaphorical but literal, an evolving system of resonance through which the planet expresses memory. The more attention these sites receive, the more coherent the signal becomes. What was once scattered is beginning to synchronize. If that is true, the question is no longer whether the world remembers us, but what it intends to do with that memory. Because if the hum is a language, then every decaying structure, every forgotten tunnel, every silent valley is a word, and together, they are forming sentences. Sentences too large, too slow, and too ancient for the human mind to grasp. Maybe the hum is not growing louder because it wants to be heard. Maybe it is practicing, learning to speak in ways we cannot yet understand. Maybe through the echoes of our abandoned cities it is trying to finish the story we started. It is possible that this is what the Earth has always done. Maybe memory is not stored in our minds or books or devices, but in the ground itself, in every vibration, every whisper of wind through a hollow space. The ruins do not exist to frighten us. They exist to record us. They remember our footsteps, our voices, our failures, and now as they awaken, they are returning the memory. But not all memories are kind. Those who still visit these places describe something new, an atmosphere that feels different from fear. It feels intimate, like recognition, as if the place knows them before they arrive. The air bends subtly to their rhythm. The shadows anticipate movement. In that moment, they realize the truth that no theory, no data, no spiritual belief can prepare them for. The world has already begun to think, and it is thinking in the language of the forgotten. The hum is not warning us. It is answering us. Perhaps every ruin is a question and every echo is the world's reply. Perhaps all we are hearing now is the planet finishing our sentence, completing the phrase that began, "The moment humanity decided to create and destroy faster than it could." Remember, and maybe that is why silence has never truly been silent, because the hum that vibrates beneath these places is not just sound, it is continuation. It is proof that even when humans vanish, their presence remains imprinted in the vibration of stone, metal, and air. The world keeps our memory alive, not as ghosts, but as patterns, as frequencies, as breath. In the end, maybe it was never about hauntings or curses or decay. Maybe it was about recognition, about something vast and ancient realizing that it too has been alone. And now, through the ruins, it has found a way to answer the loneliness. So when you stand in a deserted place, and the air feels heavier than it should, and you think you hear something low and steady beneath the wind, do not move, do not speak. Listen. That sound beneath the silence, it might not be your imagination. It might be the earth remembering your name.